We're counting down the 25 British cheap meals our grandparents ate to survive. From inventive dishes born in rural kitchens to iconic recipes crafted under strict rationing, this ranking reveals how ordinary families, from city streets to countryside shelters, stretched every scrap to keep hunger at bay. Prepare for curious creations, humble staples, and surprising solutions to shortages, each chosen for its role in feeding a nation during hardship. Which forgotten meal claims the most iconic spot? And what quirky food traditions have faded into history? Let's begin our journey of resourcefulness and resilience, starting with number 25. Number 25. Potato piglets arrived on rural tables as a small surprise for city children swept up by Operation Pied Piper. Picture a large potato, cored and stuffed with a scrap of sausage meat, then baked until the skin wrinkles and the filling turns golden. In village school logbooks from 1940 and 1941, teachers noted the shock and laughter as evacuees met these animal-shaped meals for the first time. So different from anything in London or Manchester. Some cooks even gave their creations little ears from radish slices or legs made of sticks, a playful gesture in kitchens where nothing went to waste. The Ministry of Food encouraged dishes like this to coax children into eating unfamiliar vegetables, and reunion interviews decades later recall the taste: earthy, simple, sometimes bland, but always memorable. Potato piglets set the tone for a generation learning to adapt, one meal at a time. Number 24. Stinging nettle soup arrived on rural tables when evacuee children learned to spot dinner growing wild at the edge of a field. Nettles, picked with gloves before they flowered, went straight into the pot with a potato or two and a splash of milk if any could be spared. Local newspaper columns praised the soup's iron and vitamin content, calling it a tonic for pale city faces. Oral histories recall the first taste: earthy, a bit grassy, sometimes thickened with barley or a crust of bread. For many, it was a lesson in survival: how to turn weeds into nourishment, how to find food when shops were bare. Mothers and teachers taught foraging as a skill, not just a stopgap, setting up a pattern that would shape wartime menus and post-war gardens alike. Not everyone craved a second bowl, but no one forgot it. Number 23. Mock apple pie turned the absence of fruit into a minor kitchen coup. Housewives scoured wartime newspaper columns for a pudding that looked like apple pie but used not a single apple. The trick? Soak cream crackers in water, layer them with a squeeze of lemon juice, a dusting of cinnamon, and a spoonful of rationed sugar, then bake under a pastry lid. The result? Soft, tangy, and almost convincing, fooled more than a few children at the table. Between 1942 and 1945, this recipe made regular appearances in women's pages and ministry leaflets, celebrated as proof that ingenuity could sweeten even the strictest ration book. With fruit preserves scarce and sugar tightly controlled, mock pies like this offered a rare taste of dessert, a little sleight of hand that made do and mend feel almost clever. Number 22. Oatmeal porridge formed the backbone of breakfast tables across Britain, morning after morning. Oats were never rationed, making them a rare constant when nearly every other staple felt out of reach. Ministry of Food pamphlets recommended porridge as the ideal way to start the day, slow cooked in water with just a splash of milk, if any could be spared. Diaries from the period describe the steady ritual: a single pot on the stove, stretching precious fuel, filling the kitchen with steam and the faint nutty aroma of oats. There was no sugar mountain, only a sprinkle if the ration allowed, and sometimes the last crust of bread on the side. It wasn't a treat or a celebration, just a guarantee: warm, filling, and reliable. For families facing another day of queues and coupons, porridge was the quiet promise that at least breakfast would always arrive. Number 21. Tinned fish pâté became the pantry's quiet standby when protein was scarce and the queue for the butcher stretched around the block. Pilchards or sardines, pulled from their tins and mashed with a splash of vinegar or a scrape of rationed butter, made a spread for sandwiches or toast that lasted through the week. Ministry of Food adverts in 1942 described these pâtés as a practical answer to point-rationed meat, though tinned fish itself cost precious points and often vanished from shelves without warning. Wartime kitchen notebooks list this recipe as a way to stretch a single tin across several meals, sometimes bulked out with mashed potato or a chopped hard-boiled egg if one could be spared. For families with no access to the fishmonger, this was the taste of the sea in a world of coupons and compromise, salty, rich, shelf-stable, and endlessly adaptable. Number 20. Bubble and Squeak turned yesterday's scraps into Monday's meal. After the Sunday roast, leftover potatoes and cabbage piled up on the kitchen table. Instead of letting anything go to waste, the family cook would mash the vegetables together and fry them in a hot pan until the edges crisped and the mixture began to hiss and pop. The sound that gave the dish its name. Mass observation diaries from the 1940s describe this ritual, with the smell of frying cabbage drifting through narrow terraces and children standing by for the first golden slice. No recipe was needed, just whatever was left, pressed into service for another day. Bubble and Squeak was never glamorous, but it filled plates, stretched rations, and made thrift feel almost cheerful. In homes where every penny counted, this meal was proof that nothing was ever truly wasted. Number 19. British restaurant vegetable stew filled plates in city centres where ration books and empty cupboards met their match. By 1943, over 2,000 British restaurants served up to 600,000 meals every day, each one designed to be cheap, filling, and fair. The stew itself was a lesson in bulk over luxury. Turnips, carrots, potatoes, and onions simmered together, sometimes thickened with barley or lentils, but always with strict limits on protein. Meat was measured in ounces, if it appeared at all. Municipal records show how these mass-catered meals kept queues moving and stomachs full, even as private kitchens struggled. For many, the taste was plain, the portions modest, but the scale was unprecedented. A government solution to hunger on the home front, where survival meant sharing whatever the market could provide, one ladle at a time. Number 18. Black market Sunday roast was the meal nobody admitted to cooking, but plenty risked everything to serve. In the shadow of ration books and ministry patrols, back-alley butchers traded cuts of beef and pork for cash, cigarettes or favors, always at prices far above the official ceiling. Police archives from 1941 to 1944 list dozens of raids on secret slaughterhouses, with fines climbing to £50 and jail sentences that stretched for months. One court case in Leeds, summer 1942, a butcher caught with 2 whole sides of beef hidden behind a false wall, enough to feed 50 families outside the ration system. These meals carried a double cost: extra meat for the table, but the threat of prosecution at every bite. For some, the taste of a proper roast was worth the gamble. For others, the risk was too high. The line between survival and crime blurred with every illicit joint carved behind closed doors. Number 17. Spam fritters arrived on British tables with a sizzle and a story stamped "Made in America." Imported in vast tins under the Lend-Lease Act, spam was a canned mystery meat, pink, salty, and shelf-stable, sent by the ton to fill gaps left by fashioned British pork and beef. Housewives sliced it thick, dipped each slab in batter, and dropped it into hot fat until the crust crackled golden. Ministry of Food adverts pitched spam as a patriotic protein, a taste of Allied solidarity fried up in every kitchen. For many, it was the first canned meat they could recall, both a novelty and a necessity. Wartime pantry surveys show Spam tins stacked beside condensed milk and dried eggs, a symbol of convenience when butchers' counters ran bare. Not everyone loved its texture, but for a generation, Spam fritters meant lunch with a faint American accent and a crunch that said, "For once, there was plenty." Number 16. Lentil and pea soup filled British kitchens with the promise of protein when meat was scarce and ration books ran thin. The Ministry of Food, facing shortages on every front, turned to pulses as their secret weapon, cheap, filling, and entirely unrationed. Leaflets from 1940 through 1944 urged families to serve a pulse-based soup at least once a week, offering recipes that made the most of split peas, red lentils, and whatever root vegetables could be found. In test kitchens, home economists proved that a pot of lentil soup could match beef in protein and stretch to feed a family for pennies. The message was clear. Pulses weren't just a substitute, they were a necessity, keeping bodies strong and budgets intact. While some grumbled about the texture or the earthy taste, for many, a bowl of lentil or pea soup meant security, a meal that didn't depend on the butcher's queue or the next shipment from overseas. Number 15. Hearty pie brought the countryside to wartime tables with a crust that stretched every ounce of flour and fat. Born in the rural kitchens of Devon and championed by Women's Institute members, this open pie relied on potatoes and onions, ingredients that sidestepped ration books and grew in backyard plots or village allotments. The filling was simple: sliced potatoes, slow-cooked onions, a handful of chopped herbs if the garden allowed. Cheese, if it appeared at all, was rationed by the ounce and grated sparingly on top. Wartime cookbooks described low-fat pastry, made with just enough margarine or dripping to bind the flour, rolled thin and pressed into enamel tins. The pies emerged golden and rustic, their scent filling kitchens where meat was a memory and every bite counted. Hearty pie didn't travel far beyond the West Country, but its spirit, resourceful, comforting, and quietly inventive, captured the way British cooks turned local bounty and ration ingenuity into something that felt like home. Number 14. National pudding turned the government's coarse wholemeal bread into a rare sweet treat when sugar was scarce and cravings ran high. Housewives sliced the national loaf, soaked it in watered-down milk, and layered in dried currants or sultanas, if any could be spared from the precious ration coupons. Steamed slowly in battered pudding basins, the bread softened and swelled, transforming the daily staple into something closer to comfort. Household notebooks from the era record endless variations: a spoonful of jam saved from the bottom of a jar, a pinch of nutmeg, a trickle of golden syrup when luck allowed. For many children, this was dessert: brown, dense, and just sweet enough to chase away the taste of wartime monotony. The Ministry of Food promoted these puddings as a way to stretch every crumb, making the national loaf work double duty in kitchens where nothing could be wasted, and even dessert was an exercise in thrift. Number 13. Bread and dripping brought a taste of the slaughterhouse straight to the kitchen table. Every scrap of beef or pork fat saved from the roasting pan was poured into a jar, left to cool, and spread thick on yesterday's bread for a lunch that stuck to your ribs. The best jars held a layer of jelly at the bottom, meat juices set firm, prized by children and adults alike for their salty punch. Oral histories recall how workers would pocket slices wrapped in newspaper, a cheap, calorie-dense snack that fueled long shifts at the factory or the docks. No ration coupons were needed for dripping, making it a rare luxury in a world of restrictions. Family recipe cards sometimes called for a sprinkle of coarse salt or a dusting of pepper, but most agreed the flavor came from thrift itself. In homes where butter and lard were counted by the ounce, bread and dripping was both a comfort and a necessity. a reminder that nothing edible ever went to waste. Number 12. Mock bacon brought SLI ingenuity to the wartime breakfast table, fooling taste buds when real rashers were out of reach. Housewives turned to Ministry of Food leaflets for guidance, learning to mimic the smoky, savory notes of bacon with whatever was left in the larder. Oats, a kitchen staple immune to rationing, formed the backbone. Mixed with a dash of flour, a spoonful of fat, and a heavy hand with smoked paprika or a few drops of liquid smoke if a bottle could be found. Some cooks fried thin strips of smoked fish instead, chasing the illusion of crisp edges and salty chew. The result? A plate of golden, sizzling slices that looked the part and delivered a hit of flavor, even if the sauce was pure improvisation. For families craving something familiar, mock bacon offered a moment of culinary mischief, proof that, in lean times, the right seasoning could turn oats or fish into something worth waking up for. Number 11. Mock goose took pride of place at the center of wartime tables when a real roast bird was out of reach. Ministry of Food leaflets outlined the method. Thick slices of potato layered with tart apple, a dusting of sage, and rolled oats for substance, all baked slowly until the top turned golden and the scent filled the kitchen. The result was a loaf-shaped bake. Sturdy enough to carve at the table, its slices served with gravy and whatever vegetables could be spared. Oral histories recall the hush before the first cut, children watching, adults remembering feasts from better times. In some regions, cooks added a hint of onion or brushed the top with fat to mimic crisp poultry skin. Mock goose was more than a meal. It was a gesture of celebration, a way to gather family and neighbors around a dish that looked festive, even when the ration book said otherwise. The ritual of slicing, the shared anticipation, gave weight to holidays and Sundays, proving that ceremony could survive even when the goose did not. Number 10. Fish with parsley sauce brought a taste of the coast to British tables, even for families far from the sea. Fresh fish, often cod or haddock, escaped the ration book, slipping into Friday markets and onto dinner plates as a rare protein that didn't cost a coupon. The real trick was the sauce, a simple white blend thickened with flour, stretched with water or watered-down milk, and finished with a handful of chopped parsley. It was a recipe that depended on what the grocer had and what the garden could spare. Ministry records from 1942 list this meal as a Friday staple, especially in coastal towns where trawlers still landed catches between air raids. Inland, cooks relied on rail deliveries, and the sauce became a way to mask the occasional tired fillet. For many, the scent of simmering parsley and the sight of pale sauce over flaky fish marked the end of a hard week, a reminder that some traditions survived, even as menus shrank. Number 9. Pan Haggerty brings the Northeast to the kitchen table with layers of sliced potato and onion, all baked in a single enamel dish. In mining towns from Northumberland to Cumbria, this meal made the most of what the larder could spare. Potatoes dug from backyard plots, onions from the market, sometimes a handful of grated cheese if ration points allowed. The method was simple. Slice, stack, season, then bake until the edges browned and the onions melted into the potatoes. Wartime cookbooks praised Pan Haggerty for saving fuel. One pan, one fire, dinner for the whole family. Cheese was rare, but even a sprinkle transformed the dish, turning a humble bake into a small celebration. Oral histories from the 1940s recall the smell drifting through terraced streets, a sign that tea was nearly ready. In a world of endless substitutions, Pan Haggerty endured, hearty, flexible, and unmistakably northern. 8th place goes to the National Loaf, a policy experiment that reached into every British kitchen, whether families wanted it or not. In 1942, Parliament banned white bread, ordering bakers to produce a single standardized wholemeal loaf to conserve wheat and boost fiber. The result, dense, grey, and rough, sparked a storm of complaints. Medical reports praised its nutritional value, crediting higher vitamin and fiber content with improving public health. But letters to MPS and ministry files tell a different story. Children refused sandwiches, bakers' unions protested over new methods, and shopkeepers fielded daily grumbles about the taste. The House of Commons debated whether the national loaf was a dietary advance or a daily punishment. Even so, the ban held for 4 years, shaping attitudes about bread for a generation. For many, the memory lingers: coarse crumbs, dry crust, and the knowledge that, for once, every class ate the same bread, whether they liked it or not. Number 7. National stew simmered on countless stoves, a daily ritual in homes and canteens shaped by Ministry of Food guidance. The recipe was simple but unyielding. Root vegetables like potatoes, carrots, and turnips, diced and dropped into a battered pot, thickened with a spoonful of flour and stretched with water or a splash of barley. Meat, if it appeared at all, was rationed to just 2 ounces per portion, enough to flavor the broth, but never to fill a plate. Official pamphlets advised cooks to let the stew bubble for hours, coaxing every bit of flavor from scraps and peelings. The result was a meal that filled bellies and stretched the family's protein supply as far as possible. In kitchens up and down the country, this stew became the backbone of survival. It sent a constant reminder of endurance. It was never about celebration, just enough to keep going, one ladle at a time. Number 6, marrow jam, arrived straight from the garden rows of the Dig for Victory campaign. By 1943, marrows, those oversized watery cousins of the courgette, were growing in such numbers that Ministry of Food reports warned of a glut. The solution was both simple and inventive. Slice the marrow, scoop out the seeds, and simmer the pale flesh with lemon essence and sugar, transforming a vegetable into a sweet, golden spread. Council bulletins and ministry pamphlets pushed the recipe nationwide, promising a substitute for vanished marmalade and jam. Housewives traded tips on how to mask the marrow's blandness, adding extra lemon peel or even a hint of ginger. For families who had never tasted tropical fruit, a spoonful of marrow jam on national loaf toast was a rare treat, proof that wartime policy could ripple through the kitchen and onto every breakfast table. Innovation wasn't just a slogan, it was breakfast, spread thick and shining, from allotment to larder. Number 5. Peas pudding stands as the pride of the Northeast, a dish born from necessity and shaped by local ingenuity. Split yellow peas, soaked overnight and boiled with an onion, form the base. Once tender, the mixture is tied in a cloth and baked or simmered again, transforming into a pale, sliceable block, firm enough to cut, soft enough to spread. Diaries from County Durham and Tyneside record peas pudding as a staple on miners' tables, eaten cold on bread or, when the butcher's queue was kind, served warm alongside a scrap of ham. In kitchens where cheese was a rare luxury and meat a memory, this pudding provided vital protein without straining the ration book. Oral histories recall the comfort of its earthy flavor, the satisfaction of a meal that could be made in bulk and kept for days. Peas pudding is more than a thrifty recipe. It's a badge of regional identity, proof that resourcefulness could nourish both body and spirit through the leanest years. Number 4. Welsh rarebit adaptation kept a sense of Welsh identity alive, even as rationing stripped the kitchen of its most essential ingredient. Cheese, once the heart of the dish, arrived in rations of just 2 ounces per person per week, barely enough for a single slice. Family recipe cards from the valleys reveal how cooks stretched every crumb. Grated carrot, finely chopped onion, and even mashed potato found their way into the rarebit topping, mixed with a scant handful of cheese to mimic the original richness. The mixture was spread thick on a slice of national loaf, then grilled until bubbling. Some families added a pinch of mustard powder or a splash of brown sauce for extra flavor, chasing the memory of better days. Oral histories recall the pride in serving something recognizably Welsh, even if the cheese was mostly memory. In kitchens where tradition mattered as much as thrift, these rare bits stood as proof that regional dishes could survive, adapting to whatever the ration book allowed. Coming to the top three, eggless cakes meant birthdays and weddings could still be marked with sweetness, even as rationing stripped eggs from the pantry. Housewives turned to Ministry of Food pamphlets like Eating for Victory, which spelled out the secret: a tablespoon of vinegar and a pinch of bicarbonate of soda, fizzing together to lift the batter in plates of eggs. Cocoa, if it could be spared from the ration, added a hint of luxury, but most cakes relied on dried fruit, a splash of watered-down jam, or even grated carrot to bring moisture and flavor. These cakes weren't feather-light, but they rose, browned, and filled the kitchen with the unmistakable scent of celebration. Oral histories recall mothers saving up sugar coupons for months, determined to produce a proper cake for a child's birthday or a couple's wedding day. In a world of scarcity, eggless cakes proved that joy could be baked from almost nothing, and that every milestone deserved to be marked, no matter how lean the times. In second place, British restaurant desserts brought a rare sense of comfort to tables stretched thin by rationing. Across thousands of communal dining halls, set menu puddings arrived on battered trays: semolina, stewed prunes, bread pudding. Each portion measured to fit Ministry of Food recommendations, often capped at around 150 calories. Municipal archives preserve menu cards listing these options, designed not just for nutrition, but for morale. The recipes drew on what could be spared: dried milk, a spoonful of sugar, a few slices of stale bread transformed into something sweet enough to end the meal. Factory workers, office clerks, and children from bombed-out neighborhoods all queued for the same dessert, served by the ladle in echoing halls. Oral histories recall the ritual of sharing pudding at long tables, the brief hush as bowls were scraped clean. Even the plainest semolina felt like a treat in a world of boiled vegetables and bread. These puddings didn't just fill a gap in the diet, they offered a taste of normality, a collective pause before everyone returned to work or worry. The story of British restaurant desserts culminates in the iconic Woolton pie, but it was the daily pudding that kept spirits steady, one careful serving at a time. And finally, in first place, Woolton pie stands as the defining dish of Britain's wartime kitchen, a symbol of both government policy and household endurance. In March 1941, Lord Woolton, the Minister of Food, unveiled this pie as a practical answer to relentless shortages, urging families to fill their plates with what the land could still provide. The recipe, attributed to Francis Latry of the Savoy, called for a medley of diced potatoes, carrots, parsnips, and turnips, simmered together and bound with vegetable stock. The crust, if there was one, was a triumph of thrift. Pastry rolled thin, sometimes made with just a spoonful of fat, or even topped with mashed potato when flour ran short. Ministry of Food leaflets promoted Woolton pie as both nutritious and patriotic, promising health from humble roots. Diaries and oral histories recall mothers assembling the pie with whatever vegetables they could scrounge, swapping tips with neighbors, stretching the filling to feed 6 from a single battered dish. The reception was mixed. Some praised the pie's heartiness, others grumbled about its blandness, but nearly all remembered the sense of occasion it brought to the table, a rare moment when policy and home cooking met. For many, Woolton pie became more than a meal. It was a lesson in adaptation, a centerpiece meant to lift spirits and prove that even in the leanest years, a family could gather around a pie and call it dinner. In a world of coupons and compromise, this dish captured the spirit of survival, closing the story of British cheap meals with a recipe that was as much about morale as it was about sustenance. From the humble potato piglets at number 25 to the iconic Woolton pie at the very top, our journey through 25 British cheap meals reveals a powerful story of creativity under constraint. The list showcased how families stretched meager rations with foraged greens, government-issued staples like the national loaf, and inventive stand-ins such as mock bacon and eggless cakes. Some entries like Black Market Sunday roast shocked with their tales of risk and desperation, while others, like marrow jam or mock apple pie, highlighted sheer culinary ingenuity. Across all ranks, the common thread was resourcefulness. Meals made from what was available, often turning scarcity into tradition. Ranking was based on each item's reach, nutritional impact, and symbolic value. From local oddities to national icons like British restaurant desserts. Ultimately, these meals tell us that survival wasn't just about sustenance, but about community, adaptability, and endurance. The legacy of these dishes endures, reminding us that in tough times, every crumb and creative idea truly counts.